live on Facebook, Twitter, and over on YouTube. And later on the Everything is Black and White podcast. Newcastle drew 2-2 with Tottenham up at St James's Park. I'm joined by Chief Sports Writer Lee Ryder, who I think for the first time in many games, Lee, you can actually say it was quite an enjoyable game. And, it's quite privileged to see that.
Yeah, there were parts of it that was enjoyable. I mean, being 2-1 down with 5 minutes left and sort of staring at defeat was a pretty grim experience, and it was more a case of relief when Willock crashes home the equaliser. But even then, when it was 2-2, the way Newcastle just capitulated after going 1-0 up, which was ridiculous, it did make you wonder, could they hold on? And thankfully they did. It was a decent performance in places, but just that game management let them down, and just a little bit of confidence, I think, and trying to hold the line when you go 1-0 up. They just didn't quite manage it, and it was, it could be a costly afternoon for them. We'll have to wait and see.
So the goals came from Joe Linton, and then as Lee mentioned there, for those who haven't watched it, Spurs went right up the other end and equalised, and then Harry Kane scored a second goal moments later, and it took a late one from Joe Willock, who came off the bench to grab the equaliser. Lots of people in the comments, Lee, talking about Joe Linton. He scored. It was a good goal, and he had, I think, one of the best performances we've seen in a Newcastle United shirt.
Yeah, well, I gave him man of the match, and I think it's only the second time he's won man of the match, sort of on my watch. And I mean, look, he's had the critics, he's had the stick when he hasn't played well, but today, you couldn't fault him. I mean, he had an early tester which went straight at the keeper, and I thought, oh, here we go again. But credit to Sean Longstaff, he's picked out a hell of a pass there, found him at the far post, and he's delivered. He hasn't had service like that all the way through his career at Newcastle. Yes, he's missed some bad chances, don't get us wrong. He's missed some sitters, but today he didn't, and had a hand in the second goal as well, when he sort of headed it across goal. So he did really well. Man of the match for me. And there was one or two contenders out there today, but for me it was Joe Linton, and hopefully he can find a little bit of form, which has been his problem, really, hasn't it, at Newcastle? He's had sort of odd performances here, and he's grabbed goals, but he's never been able to build on it, and he hasn't scored, went on a run of goals, and that's what he needs to do now.
I mean, his part in the equaliser for that Willock scored was brilliant. A wonderful crossing from Matt Ritchie, and he did ever so well to keep the move alive, because it was a difficult header to get back across the face of the goal, and then it fell to Willock, who tapped in. A brilliant move by Newcastle, and Willock seemed to enjoy that, and he says he did in his post-match interview, being an Arsenal player.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear his comments after the game. He said he was dismayed that he was dropped, and obviously he come here to start games, and thankfully today he's responded in exactly the right way. He hasn't sulked about it. He's waited for his chance. He's come on. He's scored a goal, and he probably should be in the team again next week. So good stuff from him. Second goal since he's arrived here on loan. I think he's a good, decent player. I think he lost his way a little bit in the games leading up to this, but today he showed that he's got that ability to respond, and he wouldn't be here if he didn't have that.
Graham Morton there on Facebook saying Ritchie and Murphy were standout. I mean, they were just two of the changes made today. There were quite a few. Sean Longstaff came in as well. Kraft was playing centre back. What did you make of the changes? Because when the team news first dropped, I think a lot of people thought it was a bit of a gamble. They were shocked at the number of changes and then the actual personnel. But it seemed to pay off in many ways. They looked much more threatening than they have done in recent weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter was carnage before the game with people, criticising the changes. It's now emerged that, there was 2 or 3 injuries in there. Ryan Fraser, the main one, obviously, he's picked up a groin injury, and, a lot of people expected to see him in, but those who played instead of him, more than played the part today. And, realistically, everyone needs to step up now. They did that today. We're looking over his shoulder again. this afternoon, and I'm not 100% sure how Fulham are getting on. I heard they were on top a few minutes ago. You might be able to update us. I don't know. But is it still 0-0?
It's still 0-0, yeah, at the moment.
Still 0-0. So hopefully it at least stays like that. But realistically, Newcastle have got to start taking accountability themselves, and they need to start winning a couple of games. Steve Bruce spoke about getting 9 points from the last 9 games. Well, he's got one of them now. He needs to find another couple of wins from somewhere else and probably pick up a shock result against one of the bigger teams. Today, you wouldn't have, we've now taken 2 points from Spurs this season. We managed to be unbeaten. We beat them last season as well down there. It's Joe Linton's favourite team. So, they can turn it on against the bigger sides. And, it's a point gained, but I have to say, like everyone else, I think hearts were in mouth when Gareth Bale comes on to take a free kick so late in the game, and that could have just sickened all of us. So look, it's a point. It feels like more, but it's not, and it could feel like a lot less if things go wrong at Villa Park.
We're talking about the positives there, but I mean, for both goals, Spurs goals, it's really negative. I mean, the way they switched off and allowed Kane in, and then the second one, Ndombele had so much room to turn and pick Kane out. What was Steve Bruce's reaction like on the touchline? Because obviously you get to see it better than we do at home. And do you think that'll be worrying him going forward? That they're giving these players this type of space, and when you do, you're going to get punished.
Yeah, I think they were furious, to be honest. And one little thing I said it in my sort of immediate reaction video was that when Newcastle scored the opener, I thought the celebrations were, they've got to celebrate the goals. We've had nothing to shout about, but I just thought that they're going a little bit over the top there in terms of, celebrating. And I just hope they can get turned around here and calm down a bit. And they didn't. And I think that's where your leadership needs to be spot on. Obviously, Steve Bruce can't do too much about that. I mean, he can shout and ball all he likes on the line, but you need your captain or an experienced player to start getting people back and turned around. You haven't won the game at that stage, 28 minutes. There's a long way to go. So, yeah, I mean, maybe they were a little bit overzealous, but just the way they've been criticised, some of it deserved. That was just an outpouring of emotion, and perhaps it cost them a little bit.
Do you think the players that came in, and we know, like Steve Bruce said, some of the changes were forced, but looking ahead to Burnley, the likes of Richie, I mean, what a return for him given the past few weeks. We've mentioned Murphy there as well, Sean Longstaff. Do you think that those players will keep their spot next week against Burnley, even if, the likes of Fraser and Co come back in and are ready and in contention for a place in the team?
Well, I think he's got some big decisions to make. I mean, what you would say about Burnley is that it's a different game to Spurs, different setup completely. If Andy Carroll is fit, you would probably want him in and around it at Burnley. They seem to sort of drag it down to that level. You've got Jeff Hendrick won't win many rave reviews, but if there's one game he will be fired up for, it will be Burnley away, and he will know the place extremely well. So that's one to keep an eye on. Whether people agree with me or not, I know for a fact Steve Bruce will have him in contention just because he's an ex-Burnley guy. Willock coming off the bench today and scoring. I know a lot of people don't get sucked into that, but it's something that does sometimes play a part. It's a little bit of motivation against your old club, and it just can sometimes get an extra 10-20% out of players. So there's lots of changes that could be made to that team, and we'll wait and see. But the good thing is that all the injuries that we've reported aren't serious.
Definitely. Do we think Wilson could be in contention for the game against Burnley?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was very close to being involved today, and St. Maximin came on for the last 22 minutes. Wilson could be set for a similar run out next week. We'll have to wait and see how he gets through the next few days. But suddenly there seems like there's a few options when at one point the team was almost picking itself. suddenly there's a lot of options there for Steve Bruce.
Final question then. I mean, we're talking about positives here from today's game against Spurs, but I guess we can only really look upon them as positives if Newcastle turn that game against Burnley into a win. And this kind of goes into the question here from Tony Milner, and he says, where do you think Newcastle will pick some points up? Is that starting next weekend against Burnley?
Well, I mean, that is one that you look at as it's an opportunity. It's a relatively even matched, contest between two teams that have been down there today. You look at, Burnley lost at Southampton. It could be a very similar game to that. It could be very scrappy. And, where do I see them getting wins from elsewhere? Well, obviously, you've got the big games coming up after that. So they probably do need to get at least a point at Burnley. Probably need to win if we're being honest. But, you've got Sheffield United and Fulham towards the end of the season. And those games, we just have to wait and see how things go. And you still want to avoid going to Fulham needing to win to stay up. You've got to avoid that one, because I've said a few times I just don't fancy it. So we have to wait and see how they get on. Fulham we've got some tough games. Arsenal, Leicester, Liverpool, but so Fulham. If you look at their fixtures, they've got Chelsea and Arsenal away, two tough London derbies. So they're under less pressure, but they've still got hard games to come. So it's going to depend on them. But I do think Newcastle can get those 2 or 3 wins from the remaining 8 games, then that should see them home.
Just finally then, today went a little bit better than you were expecting, perhaps, in terms of at least the attacking side of things, and obviously picking up a point against Spurs, who are battling for the top 4.
Well, I don't want to say I told you so, but I optimistically in the paper on Friday, I did say that I did fancy them to get a draw, just on the back of because they've had injuries, they've had international duty, and hopefully, going forward, Newcastle can continue the performance levels they have today.
Fingers crossed. Well, Lee, we appreciate you taking the time to join us on the Everything is Black and White podcast. We'll let Lee get away now. You can head over to chroniclelive.co.uk to read Lee's match report, the player ratings, all the reaction from Steve Bruce and the players, Kieran Kelly's 5 things as well. There's an Alan Shearer reaction. Plenty going on over there. Once again, guys, thank you for tuning in.